Hi everyone and welcome to another Wargame video. Today I want to do an infantry guide. Again, we're going to keep this basic as we always do because there are plenty of other videos out there that go into huge amounts of detail on each individual unit and why this person picks this and the other. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about the types of units. I'm going to split them down a little bit further than the game does in terms of its roles. I'm going to talk about the training levels. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the types of units are good for as we go through them. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the infantry transports and what you should be doing with them. Then we'll go to the game map and I want to show you in particular units of infantry in a town. Because lots of people get very confused as to why they're not killing infantry when they're using artillery on a town, when they're using napalm, when they're using Buratinos. So, first let's talk about the infantry. There are some special infantry which we will save till later. But we're going to start with the basics. Line infantry. These are your regular training troops. If you see down here on the chasseurs tab, see they've got training regular. So before we go any further, let's explain what that means. If you drill down into the game files a little bit more, it shows that training here also affects suppression. Units are harder to suppress the higher their training is, which kind of makes sense. You can see the other stats on this page. So the reason I say that is if you compare a regular troop to a shock troop who have the same FAMAS, for example, Chasseurs 85 have a FAMAS, their rate of fire is 160. Now if I scroll down here and click on the equivalent Rima 85, which is the shock variant, okay? So these are your heavy infantry. Do you see that their rate of fire with the same weapon is 232? Now equally, if you had an elite troop with that same weapon, they would have a higher rate of fire. The principle being that they're better trained, they can reload faster. Obviously their accuracy and stabilizer and everything are higher as well. My advice is use the training level as a general guide of these are better than these. And it's good to have a selection in your deck. The reason for that is that in Wargame, huge numbers of units are better than a single very well trained unit. So these cost 10 each, 15 if you include the cheapest transport. A single Special Forces squad will probably cost me 35, 40 if you include a single transport of the cheapest variety, if you can bring them in that. So that's already 40 points. That means I can bring in at least 2 squads of chasseurs, heading towards 3. I can guarantee you that versus most special forces, 3 squads of chasseurs are going to win and possibly 2 will. There's a lot of dice rolls in Wargame. So in each given fight there's no guarantees. As you will have seen, you could have 90% accuracy on a weapon and miss all of your shots. That's regular troops. Chasseurs 85, the Jaegers, their purpose in the game is not necessarily cannon fodder, but it is to absorb damage. So these are the cheaper units you want to flood into the front lines, you want to put into buildings in the big towns, and let the enemy crash against them. Now, that's not to say you should just let them die. Don't. They cost money. What you want to do is have them there and be repairing and rearming them with supply trucks. Put 2 or 3 squads forward in a building, pull 2 or 3 squads back, and keep switching them out. That's the way to play with these in buildings on the front line. So, shock infantry are very much like heavy line infantry. They do a very similar job and they should be used in a very similar way. Obviously, they just have a price premium, but they will hold their own for longer, so you'll tend to find them on the front lines, in towns, things like that. The elite infantry, on the other hand, while they could be used like this, and I have certainly used them in towns and things like that, they actually also serve the role as very good ambush troops, due to their increased speed and the fact they all have better weapons. So it can be quite handy to get them behind the enemy lines, or even block off the supply routes. So other than the line infantry, heavy shock infantry and your elite special forces, you also have light riflemen. These tend to be your stand-ins between an ATGM troop and normal infantry. So they tend to have a slightly longer range in general than other troops. Some of them, the cheaper ones, will have a standard 700 meter range launcher. However, when you look at the Legion 90, for example, you go up to 1000 meters. Light riflemen have 1575 meters. And similarly, if you look through other groups of units, for example, Gornostrelsky for the Russians, again, you see that they have a Saklos 1575 meter range missile. These are units which are very good for sticking in buildings on the front line and discouraging enemy tank rushes or enemy vehicle rushes. They tend to have a bigger squad size in the fact that they have a strength of 10, whereas your ATGM troops are going to have a strength of 2. So next you have tank hunters, or the fire support role troops. These are like the American SMAW. They have a decent anti-vehicle weapon, but they're certainly not the be-all and end-all. Their strength is quite small, at 5, but they are shot. They have a reasonable rifle. They're very good for supporting your other infantry in forests or perhaps in towns, having the role of destroying enemy vehicles that get too close. Then of course you have your engineers, also known as your flame troops, so your sappers or your assault engineers. The difference between these two units are the assault engineers obviously have a napalm launcher, which has a higher HE damage, compared to the flamethrowers that the sappers have, which have slightly less HE power, but equally the sappers have a squad of 10 rather than 5, so they have a little bit more survivability. They both serve a very similar role in the game. They are anti-infantry. Some people love them, some people hate them. They're very useful in forests and buildings for taking out enemy troops, although they pose little to no threat to vehicles. Then you have the very cheap reservist units. These are militia training level. They are terrible infantry. However, they come in mass numbers. So while they may be keen to rout very easily and become suppressed very easily because of their poor training, you can have so many of them, the enemy are going to be overwhelmed. Throwing these as cannon fodder to the front lines in a big town battle, they're going to absorb a fairly large amount of damage with a strength of 10, and they're going to output some damage on the enemy, while potentially your other troops are mopping up. Then you have your ATGM anti-tank troops. They have long-range anti-tank weapons with varying degrees of accuracy. The problem with these guys is, while they are exceptionally good at killing vehicles, they have a strength of 2, which means that quite often a single shot from an enemy tank on direct fire will kill them. They're very good at being in buildings where maybe a shot won't kill both of them in one go, but if you have them out in the field, they die very easily. They're also obviously equally very susceptible to artillery and mortar fire because of their low unit strength. Man pads, much like ATGM troops, pretty self-explanatory. They're anti-air troops. They're very good for having on the front lines, they're very good for having in buildings, they're even good for having in forests, to provide that extra firepower against aircraft and in particular choppers. They aren't radar, so seaplanes have no effect on them. They are obviously, however, very weak to mortar fire, artillery fire, and bombs coming in. I want to very briefly touch on recon infantry, because obviously they're slightly different to the infantry elsewhere. Recon infantry tend to have better stealth. Their training can be anywhere from militia to elite. They come in a variety of pricing and a variety of strengths. Things to look out for are things like the Finnish Erikko Strajikari, which I've pronounced horribly. These units are not necessarily designed to be used as scouts on the front lines, although they can do that. They're quite expensive. They're very good for causing havoc behind enemy lines. These guys, for example, have a great anti-tank launcher, and they have a great anti-air launcher. If you get one of these back behind enemy lines into their main base, you can wreak absolute havoc by killing choppers, by killing command vehicles, by killing their artillery pieces. and it'll cause them to divert troops from the front lines to guard their base. That means that hopefully if they aren't doing the same thing to you, you might have a slightly stronger force on the front lines. The other thing I wanted to briefly mention while we're on the Recon tab are things like the Navy SEALs. They have 3 weapons, obviously. They're all good against infantry as opposed to vehicles. What a lot of people get confused by is the fact that their troops will be firing their AKM, they'll be firing their Stoner machine gun, however, they won't be firing their grenade launcher. That is because units in Wargame tend to only fire 2 weapons, because they are hard-coded to have 2 weapon slots. So they will always have their main rifle out, but then their heavy weapon slot will be occupied by one or the other. So you can either be firing grenade launchers, or you can be firing a machine gun. Depending on your point of view, you're best off disabling one or the other. The same applies when it comes to fighting infantry in forests and also fighting the vehicles that are alongside them. If you don't disable the machine gun, they won't fire their missile launcher. If you don't disable the missile launcher, they may try to fire at vehicles rather than be firing their machine gun at the enemy infantry. The last thing I want to talk about are infantry transports. These can be anything from little trucks all the way up to heavily armed helicopters and obviously armoured personnel carriers. What I see a lot of people doing is bringing in infantry in a 10 or 15 point vehicle which has a couple of machine guns or maybe a launcher, etc, etc, and then sending all of those vehicles out the back of their base so they can't be destroyed, but where they're providing no use for their cost. Never underestimate the usefulness of a slightly armoured vehicle with a machine gun on top of it. They are great for supporting your infantry. If you're in a forest, they're really good for just keeping behind your infantry line and providing fire support with those slightly longer range machine guns. They're really good at providing fire support against enemy troops coming towards a forest that are maybe a little bit further away. So they're good for putting along the edges. You should never spend an absolute fortune on bringing in something like a Marder 2, which costs 30 points, and then not using it. You don't even have to keep them with your infantry. If you bring in a Marder 2, if you bring in an expensive Bradley with a TOW 2, you can send those along with your other forces, reinforce other parts of the map, be doing damage at range. These are fantastic units, don't waste them. You also get them quite cheaply compared to how much they might cost in the Vehicles tab. Okay, so welcome to the game map. First thing we're going to do is have a look at infantry in a forest. As you can see here, I've got 40 Mostrzelski, 4 squads, all grouped up. Now, in general in Wargame, if you're in buildings, buildings can hold a maximum, or each town sector, so each of these highlighted areas as I go around them, can hold 4 squads. No matter what size those squads are, they can hold a maximum of 4 squads. Because there are 4 positions for them to stand in, which we'll explain in a minute. In that situation, you're better having groups of 2, 3 or 4 units to fight over those buildings. In a forest, that doesn't really apply. In the forest, you may have a full group like that. However, only this squad may be visible to the enemy and engaging the enemy. The other units will not provide fire support or cover for that squad. These 3 squads will be stood at the back, not firing and not taking damage, and eventually that squad will die. If you split them up, it forces all the groups to move forward and engage the enemy. So in a forest, because of the way the game's mechanics work, always split up your infantry into individual squads. They will perform better. It also means that you'll be shooting the enemy from multiple sides, which can be beneficial, especially when you consider side and rear armor of vehicles. So if you've got a vehicle engaging a squad over here, but you've got a squad here, then they're going to get a side shot on that vehicle. The other thing to keep in mind is use those vehicle transports. They have machine guns. They can provide a lot of fire support and suppression. Definitely keep them behind your infantry if you can, so it's a bit of micromanaging, but they will provide great fire support against enemy infantry. Now, do you see, if we zoom in on these units, they're all sat in particular buildings, and every so often, they're moving around. So we've got someone there, someone there, someone there, oh, and they've all moved again. Infantry have the amazing ability to teleport around town zones. And also teleport between town zones effectively, because they move so quickly. And then they move all around those town zones very quickly as well. Same for the VDVs. There they are over there. And in a little while they'll move. So they just go from building to building. What most people assume is that they're just sat in one corner. But if you micromanage units enough in buildings, you'll soon realise that they move about. Because, for example, your ATGM troops will not always be sat at this edge firing at things coming in. They might have decided to wander to the other edge. And you'll have to click them and right click on the enemy for them to open fire. What I'm going to do is fire the Buratino at these guys. The reason for that is I want to show you why units miraculously survive Buratino fire in towns. Because I think this is something that confuses new players when they're using all of this heavy artillery, they're using their mortars, they're using napalm, they're using napalm launchers like the Buratino. So I've caught them, I've done quite a bit of damage. But look at the units. They're moving away from the flames. They're no longer standing over this side in this corner. They're all over this side. And if we just keep looking at them, they will not go back to where the flames are. They will stay at that side of the town zone. And obviously, even though they got shot and took some damage, they immediately teleported to the other side of the town zone to save as many as they could. And they won't move from there now. Do you notice they're no longer jumping around every few seconds? They're sticking to that one side. They're still moving, but they're not moving anywhere near the flames. So next time you attempt to take out a town, bear in mind that there's probably still infantry in there. Because they will just keep moving around and avoiding the flames. And you see, as soon as the flames cleared, they started going to the other side again. Okay, so I think we've covered the basics. We've got the types of infantry, we've talked a little bit about the infantry transports, and you've seen a few little tips and tricks on the game map itself. I don't really want to go into any more detail than that, or the video will get far too long, but that should give you a good overview of what infantry are and their general uses and a few little extra tips. Now, I have by no means covered everything to do with infantry. There is a lot that I have not covered. So as always, please do feel free to leave comments down below with extra tips and tricks so that newer players can learn from you. Other than that, as always, please do like, share and subscribe. Check out the other videos on the channel, and I'll see you all soon.